Okay, hi everybody. Thank you very much for joining us. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Peter Llewellyn and I run the services at MedCommsNetworking.com. Services intended for the global MedComms community, by which I mean people who are working in and around MedComms, medical education, medical communication, medical publishing, or indeed people who want to join MedComms and start their career. You'll find lots of resources at MedCommsNetworking.com. What we're doing, and we've been doing it for a while now, is running these Zoom meetings as a way of involving more people, and we can capture the content, and the videos are over at NetworkPharma TV. So if you've missed any of the previous webinars, please go and have a look over at NetworkPharma TV. Today, absolutely delighted to have Eleanor Steele. I think I now refer to you as AKA MedComms Mentor.
Yep.
And thank you very much for coming. You're going to talk about controlling and taking control of your MedComms career. Which is something obviously I wish I'd done a long time ago. So over to you, Eleanor, for a presentation, and then we'll have a Q&A at the end of that. Thank you.
Super. Thank you very much, Peter. So I'm just going to share my screen. And here we go. So hopefully you can see my slides there. Brilliant. Okay. So taking control of your MedComms career. Firstly, thank you to Peter for having me back for another webinar. And thank you everyone for joining me today. So we're going to be looking at a couple of different ways of taking control of your career. So taking control of your own career, helping your team take control of their career, and taking control of your freelance career. So I'm going to start off with a quick introduction to how I kind of came up with the topic of today's webinar, and then get into the thoughts I have around taking control in these three areas. Some of the tips that I'm going to talk about will actually be relevant across more than one area, but because I only have a limited amount of time, I'm only going to mention them once. So it's worth listening to all the sections, even if you think only one is going to be relevant to you. Also, because there's a lot of information, I've put together a summary for each of the sections, and I'll let you know how you can get hold of that at the end of the presentation. And as Peter mentioned, we're going to be having a bit of a Q&A discussion session at the end. So it would be great to have any questions that you might have for that. Okay, so some of you may have joined my previous webinar, which looked at the design results from the survey that I ran at the beginning of the year, which was looking at the current training situation in MedComms. So thank you to anybody who completed that survey and who joined that webinar. I was asking people whether they mainly received training, delivered training, or did both equally. I presented some initial results in the first webinar, but there's an awful lot of other information that we didn't go into in detail then. I haven't done as much as I had hoped with the data since then, because that webinar was actually the day the announcement that the schools were going to close came out. So my plans had to change a little bit, which is one of the reasons that I thought about, taking control of your career. But the other reason was one thing in particular that caught my eye in the survey data. So predating lockdown, coronavirus, and all of those sort of impacts, was this question: is the training you receive in your current job sufficient for you to receive for you to fulfill your potential? So the people who answered the question had responded that they mainly receive training, or that they give and receive training equally. So the people who had responded that they mainly give training didn't see it. So this was around, it was 95 respondents, and almost half of those responded that they didn't think that the training they receive in their current job is sufficient to fulfill their potential. And around half of the other responses, of which there were 13, they were relatively negative, but kind of definitive no. So I decided to look into this a little bit deeper. So I split out the data in terms of how long each of the respondents had actually been working in MedComms, and found that if you look on the yes column, the purple chunk represents people who have been in MedComms over 10 years. They think they receive training that's sufficient for them to fulfill their potential. Whereas in the no column, over 3/4 of the respondents who've been in MedComms for less than 10 years don't think that the training that they receive currently is sufficient to fulfill their potential. Now, I thought this was pretty interesting, and to be completely honest, it was pretty surprising There's been a lot of discussion around training in medcoms over the last few years. A lot of places have graduate training schemes and initiated internal training academies, and a lot of those are focused more on kind of early career stages. So it seemed that for that proportion of people to think that the training that they're receiving isn't enough for them to fulfill their potential was something that I wanted to think about a bit more. Now, I don't have the details of exactly what training these people have done or what they're being offered, but it got me thinking about the difference between early career stages and careers that are more established. So I think the level of control you have over your career is linked to career stage. In the early stages, you're much more reliant on the training that's being offered to you and receiving on-the-job training from mentors, team leaders, line managers, and the quality of that can be variable depending on who you're working with and whether your style meshes, whether you're actually going to be taking away what you need from those interactions. And it basically boils down to the fact that you don't have much control over what you're being trained on and how that training is delivered. Whereas when you're in a more established stage of your career, it's more a case of refining the skills that you already have, plus the fact that you're going to be more self-sufficient because you've been around for a bit longer, you've got more experience under your belt, and you've got a wider network of contacts, so you're more likely to know somebody that you can ask for help if you need it. You're more in control. So that made me think a little bit more about what being in control of your career really means at any stage. And I think that it means making choices with intention and ownership. So knowing what you're doing and why you're doing it and what you're aiming for with that. If you're not in control, then this can affect you in a lot of different ways. You might be feeling frustrated or overwhelmed, like you're being pushed in a direction that's not right for you. You might feel stuck in a rut, like you're doing the same thing over and over without anything changing. You might feel inertia, like you want something different, but you don't know what. And you may be in a situation where other people around you seem to be progressing much more quickly, and you're not sure why they're achieving that success, but you're not. So not being in control of your career means not really knowing what you want, or not knowing how to achieve what you want if you do know. Now, something that I don't think gets talked about enough is the fact that sometimes your career is not your focus. Life can get in the way. I mean, global pandemic, anyone? I've had to massively adjust what I've been doing this year because lockdown meant no childcare, and my capacity for work was severely limited at times, and it's been a real struggle, and I haven't had very much time for thinking and focused work. Is crucial thing on your career, and body will have a stage in their career where it isn't their focus for some reason, and I don't think it gets talked about enough. So when something comes up which means that your career isn't your focus, I think it's important to acknowledge this and talk about it with your line manager, so the expectations and your objectives can take this into account. Now, this might seem like a really daunting conversation to have, but acknowledging a shift, you're taking your career seriously. And it's generally going to mean that better than desperately trying to keep progressing and keep pushing yourself when you're under really challenging circumstances. And taking care of yourself shows more respect for your job and your and the company that you're working with. Burning out and having to take time off with stress and, you know, things not going well. Important to think you are in control of your career. It should be you. So making that decision proactively can be really important. So something else that I think we need to think about is the fact that careers in medcoms can be really complicated. I've been around for over 15 years and I've heard a lot of presentations and discussions about how flexible careers in medcoms can be. But it's surprising how many of those actually boil down to you can work from home sometimes. Now, there are some companies out there that are genuinely flexible, and some talk about this flexibility an awful lot, but then there are instances where people have tried to explore working in a different way and been told, yes, we're flexible, just not like that. Or flexibility that's offered comes at the expense of development and other opportunities. So sometimes medcoms is actually much more rigid than you expect. Something else I think affects careers is the fact that when people are really good at something and become an expert, they tend to get sucked into doing it over and over, rather than being given the opportunity to learn something. They might take more time or make mistakes. If you get pigeonholed early in your career, how do you explore enough of the different options that are out there to know what you want to aim for and how you want to work in the future? Something else that I think can affect how you make decisions in your career is expectations. Sometimes the path that's sort of set out within a company can put a lot of pressure on people to follow a particular trajectory. But if they don't, there can be a sense that you've kind of failed if you've stayed in a particular role. But I think that career progression doesn't have to mean you have to get promoted all the time. Becoming a genuine expert role is really valuable. You can also broaden your role with other responsibilities at the same level, rather than necessarily becoming more senior all the time. Seniority generally means you have to do things like more travel, you have greater client-facing responsibilities, you have greater commercial responsibilities, and these things aren't going to suit everybody, and okay. Also, now that medcoms is becoming increasingly virtual, you don't necessarily have to think that the career options in your current agency are the only ones out there. It's going to be much easier time goes on to actually work with agencies based in a variety of different places, or even these that are 100% virtual, so everybody's in a different location. And I think these are important things to think about. So how can you take control of your own career in medcoms? The first thing I want to look into is whether you have a job description. It's surprising how many people in medcoms actually have one. And there can be really significant differences between job descriptions with the same title between different companies, especially across the Atlantic. It's pretty tricky to make plans for how you want to progress if you don't really know your position. So things like what your current responsibilities are and how the expectations, the level you should be performing at match up with those. How do your skills and experience match up with them? And which areas might you still need some support or training to tick the box for your current role before you think about progression? Something else to think about is talking to people to find out what other ones could be available. So broadening your network, maybe with a MedComms networking event or something, you can talk to people who are from different companies in different roles to get a feel for what else is out there. You ask them things like, what was your pathway into your current position, and what kind of skills, experiences and preferences helped you get there? Once you've had a few of these conversations and can start thinking about the different things that might be on offer, about what sounds appealing to you. Is it the types of projects or the clients, the company and practices, the responsibilities around a particular role, or the opportunities? And then if you find something you're sort of narrowing in on, it's worth examining your motivation for that. Does that goal match up skills that you have, the preferences that you have, or is it something that seems expected because of your current position and how you've been working previously? Is it really something to go for? If it is, fantastic. The next thing to do is make a plan. Once you've narrowed down what you're hoping to aim for, you need a good plan for how to. So you need to think about the areas of your current job that are directly preparing you for this goal. And looking at that helps you narrow down any areas that you haven't covered yet. If there are things that you haven't covered and it's not looking likely that you will in your current situation, where could you get help to actually get this kind of experience under your belt? Would you need training or mentoring? Would you work on a new type of project with a different kind of client, new therapy area? Do you need to get some more business development experience? Once you've narrowed a few of these steps that you need to take, then how can you break them down into sort of career objectives that will lead towards this vision? It's unlikely that you're going to be able to do everything at once. So what comes first? Are there things that are completely have to do? Or are there some things that maybe are just nice to have or would be helpful if you could get the opportunity? Think about those things and prioritize them as much as you can. And also think about timelines. Make sure that it's going to be practical to carry them out in the timelines that you have set yourself, so that you're not putting unwanted pressure on. Once you've thought about the steps and objectives, talk them through with your line manager so that they can become your official objectives or be built into them. And then, once they're there in your objectives plan, make them a living part of your work rather than something that you dig out a year before your annual review. Think about them every time you get a new project. How can this project help you achieve your objectives? Taking stock on a regular basis, like once a month, but also at the end of big projects, will help you see how you're tracking against them in reality and need to change direction a little bit, or if you're actually speeding ahead and could maybe add some more in. It's also a really good idea to listen out for opportunities that could help you with your objectives, maybe at resourcing meetings, or if you've been asked to volunteer for a brainstorm. Brainstorms are a really good way to get exposed to new ideas and new people, especially because they often involve crowd from the team that you're working with from a day-to-day basis. So can expose you to things that you've come across. So that is taking control of your own MedComms career in a nutshell. If you missed the beginning, there is a summary of all of this information that you will be able to get hold of, and I will let you know how at the end. So, how can you help your team take control of their careers? This is something that I think can be very tricky for line managers, and we don't necessarily get specific training on this based on the medical writers. So it's something that definitely think about a lot while I've been line manager. So something that I think helps a lot is to give a broader and deeper understanding of what other roles might be available. Sometimes this is something that is covered an induction session and somebody joins a company, but then there isn't much discussion about it after that. Something that you could do to make this a bit clearer, bring it to life, is hold an event where some of the senior people from your agency, or potentially even across your network, if you're in that kind of organization, come together to give an overview of what their role involves, but also how got into that position. It could be as a series of quick presentations that are followed by a Q&A. It could also be a speed dating style event if you actually ever manage to get into a room with people you work with again, where attendees would sort of circulate around the senior people, so have a one-to-one chat with them and ask the questions that they really want to know the answers to. So covering, the experiences that helped me get where I am today, the skills and the mindset you need to have to do what I do, and the best and worst aspects of my job to really bring it to life, warts and all. Now, something else that is helpful is job descriptions, as I mentioned earlier. Making sure that you have an up-to-date job description for each role within the team is really critical for making sure that people are aiming for the right things. If there is a really clear career pathway, it's really helpful to annotate each job description with how the expectation of the skills and performance has progressed from the previous role. If you can give specific examples of how this could be demonstrated, it's so helpful for adapting these things into smart objectives when team members are hoping to progress. Now, once you've got those examples, they're very handy for making sure that your team members can craft their own objectives. They'll probably need support with this, especially for more junior people. And it's not really a skill that comes naturally to a lot of people, but it's so useful, and it creates a greater level of ownership over the objectives than if they are sort of set by your line manager. If it's something that you've come up with and you understand how it's tied to the next step in your career by potentially relating it back to the annotated job descriptions, it makes that progression more tangible. And this can also really help understand how near or far somebody is from that next step in their career, which can make those conversations around progression much more realistic and sometimes a bit less tricky if somebody has a long way to go before they're actually going to make that next step. So that is how to help your team take control of their careers in a nutshell. And at the end, I'll let you know how you can get the summary so you can get some further details. And then taking control of your freelance career. So something that I've seen a lot is that freelancers kind of feel like they have to accept every job that they're offered. Not all freelancers, of course, but there is a feeling that if you're offered work, it's best to just take that and get on with it. This can lead to burnout, or just working on lots of things that you don't really enjoy. Now, accepting everything that you're offered can be very useful, especially when you're starting out, but making sure that you're doing it for the right reasons is critical, I think. So, making money, fair enough. If you need to make money, accept away. It's also very useful for making contacts across the industry. And also in the early days, getting to know the range of things that you could do and getting a feel for your preferences and the strengths that you have now that you're working for yourself rather than for an agency, which is a very different way of working. But then if you can specialize or at least position yourself with intention by highlighting the project types or therapy areas that you want to work in, and maybe de-emphasizing or not mentioning the things that you're less interested in or specifically don't want to do, then it means that you have more control over the conversations that progress with potential clients. It doesn't mean you have to turn down things that you're offered if it's not something on that list, but it means you have more control over that decision. You understand what you want to do and the reasons why you're going to accept something that's potentially not on your preferred list. And it helps make sure that you're heading in a direction that you've chosen rather than just being pushed in a certain direction purely by market forces. So something else that I would say is really important for freelancers and anybody in MedComms is feedback. Now, a lot of freelancers will submit a project and then literally never hear anything more about it. Sometimes not even a thanks, I've got the email kind of thing. And I would say that sometimes the only feedback that they really get is whether or not they receive more work from that company. Now, feedback is such a valuable way of developing your skills. And without that, you're just working in isolation the whole time. So I would say that it's really worthwhile booking in a 5-minute call or just sending a short email asking for a bit of feedback once you've done a piece of work, or coming to the end of a contract potentially, if you're working on a bigger project, then it gives you really valuable insights into what worked well and where you might need to rethink things a little bit. And you can feed that into your future work, and hopefully sort of enhance your processes and the work that you're doing. And if you're specializing in something, making sure that you are really the expert. Now, I know a lot of people who have gone freelance so that they can have a more flexible lifestyle, but then actually ended up working a lot harder and far more hours than they ever did at a company, because there's nobody really monitoring that and making sure that you don't. So it is tricky, and finding that balance can be something that takes a bit of time. But I would really recommend planning the income that you need on a monthly or annual basis to work out what proportion of your available hours you should aim to be doing client work. And then using that to set boundaries with each new client you start working with before you start, which will help make sure that you don't accidentally overstep the lines that you've drawn. I've had a few experiences where clients that I've been working with on a freelance basis have sent me something and said, I know you're not going to look at this until next week because you're not working today, but I just wanted you to have it for when you log in. And it's actually been really nice to see that that's acknowledged, that they know the boundary that I have. And if I log in and look at it, then I can do it because I've chosen to. And having those boundaries set up means that you're much more likely to actually kind of stick to them. And agencies are also usually very understanding if you push back and say, no, I can't pick it up today because I'm not working. And understand that there are times when you're not going to be working with them, or potentially working with another client. Super. So the final recommendation I have for freelancers. Now, this might sound a little bit self-serving for somebody who runs a training company to say, but this comes from the survey that I ran. And some of the responses from freelancers about training made me so sad. There were people who really sounded as though they had given up on career-specific personal development, having gone freelance, because they didn't think that anything outside of agencies would be relevant to them. And because they're freelance, the agencies aren't offering it to them. And they also felt like they didn't have the time or the money to invest in training, which can seem very expensive or very time consuming. But I think it's so important to make sure that you keep developing and keep thinking about how you can hone your skills or look at new areas as a way of kind of adding compost to your brain soil, so that you can feed it into the other work that you're doing and rejuvenate your processes. So something that I would recommend that doesn't involve a big investment of time or money would be podcasts. They're great for keeping yourself up to date with things or exploring new topics. And there are also lots of courses and things that are out there for free or with a small fee on sites like Coursera, edX, FutureLearn. So that there's something out there for anybody, no matter what your budget or your time is like. So to finish off, I think the following things are applicable across the board. Talk to people and listen to what they say. It's a good idea to really take stock once in a while, but not when you're stressed. So now is not necessarily the best time to be, readjusting your career, other than making the changes that you need to get through the day and keep things ticking over. Once you know what you want, make a plan and stick to it. But be flexible and kind to yourself. So if you'd like to hear more, then these are the places that you can get hold of me, and I would be very, very pleased to answer any questions or give you any further information if there's something that we didn't cover today. And if you would like to download one of the summaries, then you can get them from medcommsmentor.com/career control, and there's also a link in the header bar on the website, so you can just navigate there from medcommsmentor.com. So that is the end of my presentation, so I will hand back over to Peter. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thanks, Eleanor. If we could lose the slides.
Yep, I'm just finding the button. It's on my other screen. There we go.
That'd be cool. Okay, so I think we should acknowledge, you won't be aware of this, Eleanor, but your sound was breaking up a little bit during that. I think we'll get away with it. Oh no,
sorry.
It wasn't that, but no, don't worry. We'll get away with it, but just so that you're aware, the sound is breaking up a little bit at your end. Okay. But thank you very much. That was all very clear and comprehensive, and it's great that you've been able to provide some additional resources that people can come back and find. So that's all good stuff. Thank you very much. So for those of you listening to this, just for 10 minutes or so, have a bit of a discussion around some of those points that were raised, and a reminder that you've got two buttons at the bottom of your window. You've got a Q&A button and a chat button, both of which will pull up text boxes, and you can text in any comments or observations, and so on, and we'd welcome all your thoughts, please, that way. Eleanor, I'm going to just kick off and just face up to the fact we are in the middle of the lockdowns, or most people are, who are listening to this, I guess. It's transformed a lot of people's working style and practice and culture and all sorts of things, and we probably don't know where it's going to go. But just if you've got some observations, particularly, let's just take your first group, the people who are being trained, and no doubt that there is evidence that people, if they are a little bit anxious at home, one of the factors that is causing anxiety is a sense that we're not getting the training and development and support that we would if we were in an office, sort of thing. So we're not quite sure where it's going. I'm not really wanting to turn this into a COVID-19 presentation or particularly crystal gazing, but just a sense of how do you think it's going for the people at home, and the training that they're getting. Has it all collapsed out there? Are the companies putting the right sort of resources into supporting people? Just, have you got some sense of what's going on out there from the people you've talked to?
So I think it's pretty variable, and that there are some real challenges for people who are not used to line managing somebody remotely. So it's not the same as line managing somebody in the office, and it takes a bit of getting used to, and it's not going to suit everybody's style. But that being said, I think keeping communicating and making sure that if you feel like you are not getting the opportunities that you would have done, things are being cancelled, or it's just not being scheduled when you had been led to believe that things would be coming up, there would be training sessions on the calendar, talk to your line manager about that, and find out whether it's because something is brewing and they just haven't let you know, because it may well be that if a session was planned for a face-to-face training, then it needs a little bit of refocusing and rejigging and working out how it can be done remotely. So I would say communication is the key. So if you're feeling like things are not happening and you need them, talking to your line manager, talking to a mentor, is going to be the best way to make sure that you can keep things moving. Or if you feel like you're not getting the feedback because you're not able to go and sit with somebody and say, okay, these are my questions on the brief, this is my question on the feedback that you gave me, booking in some time to talk it through is going to be the best way to handle that. I think different companies are going to have a different setup for how you can do those things, and making use of the tools that you have, rather than sitting in silence or at home locked away and worrying is definitely the best thing that you can do.
I think it's, I mean, I will say this, I do think it's interesting and noteworthy that in the last few years, MedComms agencies, to be oversimplistic, but have invested a lot more in supporting and training staff. And that's
Yeah.
That I do think is a definite thing that's happened, and in more formal ways and so on. And some agencies have certainly invested a lot in formalised training schemes of one sort or another, and some of them have invested a lot in online training and so on. And you know, that's all good. But it's very easy to forget how much you learn by just sitting around with other people and hearing what's going on.
Yeah.
And I think that's, you know, we could, some of us will talk, I will talk, you know, at length about how great this virtual environment is, but we must remember that there are practical challenges to it, and there are people who are going to struggle a bit with it, and actually, just even if they don't think they're struggling, they're just not gaining as much. And particularly at the early stage, I mean, one of the things I'm intrigued about, and whether you've got a comment on this, but you know, not that many weeks ago, we'd have been very definitely saying to anyone coming into this business, you have to go in the office. It's very unlikely that you'll get a job where you don't come into the office, and for all the right reasons. And then in the last 3 months, we've had a whole bunch of people who are being onboarded remotely, as it were. And you know, there's a lot of positive noise about that. And I don't know, again, what's going to happen. You know, are we going to go to a situation where we'll just go, now we can all come back to the office, we're going to come back to the office, or are we going to see just simply more people being onboarded? You know, and that dynamic is going to be quite interesting. And specifically with that group of sort of new entries, as it were, do you get a sense at the moment? Are you willing to predict what's going to be happening in 6 months' time? That's a dangerous question at this point, but
yeah, that's tricky.
You see the point I'm making?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think it will depend on how it's handled. And I think different agencies are going to be doing that in different ways. I think some of the things that will make a difference for people in that cohort will be things like on the technology side, whether there is an instant message function that is available within their company, because I've worked places that didn't have that and it was a nightmare. But having that way of contacting somebody that isn't giving them a ring or sending an email, just that, I don't get this, can you help? And having somebody specific that they can direct those kind of questions to, that's not their line manager. I've had experiences where more sort of entry-level people have not wanted to bother me as their line manager because they see how busy I am and they don't want to come to me with their stupid questions. So having a line manager appoint a mentor who is maybe, you know, 6 months ahead of them, or the next roll up, who's been there much more recently and possibly has fewer meetings in their calendar, that they can just go to and say, I don't know where that template is, can you help? Or what does this abbreviation mean? What is PFS? You know, the silly questions that you don't want to kind of take time out of your line manager's day, having somebody that you can go to with those kind of conversations. Something else that I would really recommend is have a 5-minute catch up at the beginning of every day with anybody who is in that sort of new intake cohort, just to kind of say, okay, what's on your plate today? How are you thinking about that? When are you thinking it's going to be done by? But also, how did yesterday go? Are there any things that surprised you or you had difficulty with? Just so that you can keep that contact going, that you would probably do kind of reflexively in the kitchen making a cup of tea in the morning if you were in the office. But making time for it and consciously making the effort means that people are much less likely to go for 2 weeks floundering on a project that they have no idea how to get done, and at the end of it coming up with a big mess of awful, and steering them back onto the right track early on.
And again, much easier to do if you're in close proximity, and you can, because we can all kid ourselves a little bit on Zoom meetings or whatever it is, and everything's fine, and then you go home or turn off the Zoom and go to the corner and sob a little bit, sort of thing. So it's important to have that communication. And Helen's suggesting, which is an interesting point, perhaps, just saying, you know, earlier on in the career, maybe one of the problems is that, you know, you get a lot of training when you first arrive, and a number of companies have got quite formalized training schemes in for those initial stages, and then you're thrown out and you learn on the job something, but suddenly that sort of formalized training goes. Again, it varies around the different agencies, I think, but that probably is a real potential problem. And again, it's something as a manager you need to be thinking about and supporting, not just at the beginning but all the way through. As absolutely. You go through, Gwen's sort of asking, you know, any further suggestions to avoid getting pigeonholed, because that I completely concur with you that I've seen people who wanted to be pigeonholed, and that's not
Yes.
necessarily a bad thing. But there's lots of people who do get pigeonholed and they don't want to be. So maybe just talk to Gwen's point for a couple of minutes there.
Yeah, absolutely. I think sometimes people get pigeonholed kind of accidentally by themselves. So they see how critical they are in an account, and they feel like it would be very difficult for somebody to replace the work that they're doing. Sort of they've got all the knowledge about something, and so they don't actually say, I'm not doing this, I'm bored, I've been doing the same Congress submissions for 2 years now and I'm not getting anything out of it. And having that conversation with your line manager might actually start a way of finding another path, or bringing somebody else in so that they can kind of learn from you, and then you can edge away. But if you don't say, then your line manager is not going to know that this is what you're. So having those conversations, and also trying to see what else could be out there and the kind of things that you would like to do instead of what you're doing at the moment, makes that conversation much easier, because you can kind of give the answer as well as ask the question. And I think that's always going to be helpful to a busy line manager who may not necessarily have the time to think about it too much.
Yeah. Just perhaps by way of wrapping up on your third part was about the freelancers. I always find it interesting.
Yep.
And it's a frustration for me. You know, I've often surveyed freelancers or ran the meetings with freelancers. You know, quite a lot of freelancers don't really see the need or the need for training. Yep. It can be quite often the case that you're a good medical writer. That's, you know, you've come out, you've been trained, you're now going to do freelance work, and you don't want to spend time training yourself because you're already trained, and you don't want to spend the money, and you'd rather be working and so on. And the sort of personal development, whatever side of things for freelancers, you know, quite often disappears quite quickly. Which I just think I always argue you're running a business, you know, and you need to invest in yourself and your training and so on. But so I guess all I'm looking for, you know, you agree with that, but have you got any comments for the freelancers, or can you just, you know, again, like I want to tell them, you know, you've got to keep going and training yourself, sort of thing. You don't just sit back and wait and assume that if you can't do something, at that point the client will help you or you'll figure it out. You should be continually learning and developing. I mean, should we just agree that's important?
I do agree. And I would say there are a couple of things to think about. That first of all, MedComms is an area where things are changing quite rapidly. And if you don't do any kind of development or learn anything, then you may get left behind and not actually be meeting the objectives of projects that previously you would have been able to handle fine. There may also be sort of new areas or new project types that you would prefer to do than the kind of things that you're doing at the moment, that you just don't know about or you don't get exposed to if you don't do a bit of sort of broader digging and thinking about things that you could possibly do. I think also, if you are of the mindset that learning and development isn't that important, it may well be because you're not getting feedback. Potentially, you know, if you're not asking for feedback and thinking about development, which I think is crucial, you know, if you are of that kind of mindset, you're going to ask for feedback and then feed that into your future work. If you're not thinking about that and you're not thinking about learning and development, you may well not be aware that there's a gap between what the client is hoping for and expecting and what they're actually getting. So
about communication between the two parties.
Exactly.
Okay, look, I'm gonna wrap up the recorded part of this session now, and again say thank you to Eleanor. I'm sure you're happy for me to say to everybody who's watching now or later on the recording that you'd be happy to hear from them via LinkedIn.
Absolutely.
Or whatever, that's straightforward. Just a reminder, if anyone's wanting more information, it was just give the website address again, just simply go.
Yeah, it's medcommsmentor.com.
That's it, and if they can go to the careers. Control your career section from there. Yeah. Okay.
Yep.
So thank you very much, Eleanor. Thank you everyone for listening. And for anyone who is watching this subsequently, you'll find everything we do at medcommsnetworking.com. You'll find lots and lots. There's now hundreds of videos actually at NetworkPharma TV. So there's some good resources there, and we'd love to see you again. And as part of what we're doing. So thank you very much, everybody. I'm going to close the recording now. For those of you who are watching, don't run away because we're going to carry on talking at the top of the hour. Eleanor, I'm just going to, it's a thing now, as you know, that we wave. So
Yeah.
wave and say goodbye. Bye-bye.
Bye.